This happened on a Sunday night during the first week of the year. I was home alone that entire weekend because I had already gone to visit my family for Christmas and didn't have anyone to go out with that night. So I just stayed home, made a few snacks, drank a few cans of beer, and watched TV all night. I watched a few comedy movies on television to keep myself entertained. I didn't really feel sleepy, and around 2 a.m., I felt the urge to get up and do something since I had been sitting on the couch almost the entire day. I looked out the window. Snow was falling lightly, not too much. I knew it was very cold and dark outside, but for some reason, going for a short walk suddenly sounded like a pretty good idea. I put on my jacket, a hat, gloves, and stepped outside to walk around the neighborhood. Immediately, I noticed how strangely quiet it was. Even though it was already 2 a.m., I thought that since it was Sunday night, there would probably be some kind of party somewhere, usually is. But all the houses only had their exterior lights on, and there wasn't a single car on the road. Everything was silent and empty. It was actually very peaceful. I'm not sure how long I walked. I clearly wasn't completely sober, so it was hard to keep track of time. I zigzagged through the neighborhood with no real direction or route in mind. Eventually, I made my way to the park. The path there looked like it hadn't been shoveled since morning, but there was only about 2 inches of snow, so I decided to keep going. I thought changing the scenery a bit would make the walk more interesting. After walking for a while, I realized that not only was the snow getting harder to walk through, but there were no lights along the trail at all. I had walked this path at night before, and there were always small street lights lining the way, but maybe they had been turned off for the winter. A few minutes later, I decided to turn back. I dragged my feet through the snow, walking for about a minute in the direction I had come from when I noticed something very strange. There was another set of footprints running parallel to mine, clearly made just minutes earlier. Someone had definitely been walking right behind me, and honestly, it looked like they were following me, because there hadn't been any footprints there before. At least that's what I thought to myself. The more I thought about it, the more a terrifying chill ran through my body, but I didn't see anyone. And when I tried to follow the footprints to see where they went, I realized they veered off the path and went straight into a pitch-black area where I couldn't see anything. For all I knew at that moment, someone could have been standing just 10 feet in front of me, and I wouldn't have had any idea because it was completely dark. I started walking faster to get out of there, but I didn't fully think it was something truly dangerous yet. I'll admit that I was probably a bit drunk and didn't fully grasp how strange and threatening the situation was, especially with those footprints disappearing straight into the darkness. At the time, I tried to convince myself that it was just a big coincidence. I left the area and continued walking deeper into the neighborhood instead of heading straight home. I walked for another 15 minutes. I wasn't actively searching, but I didn't see anyone else, so I figured everything was fine. When I got home, I took off all my winter clothes and thought I'd take a shower before going to bed. But when I had only made it halfway up the stairs, I suddenly realized that the house was unusually dark and that all the lights upstairs were turned off. This startled me because I'm the kind of person who leaves the lights on all day. I hadn't even gone upstairs at all since waking up that morning. I was certain I had left the lights on. I know this may sound like a small detail, but even if I had been much drunker, I would still have known that the upstairs lights were on. I carefully climbed the remaining steps, looked down the hallway, and turned on the light. I didn't even know what I was looking for. I walked down the hall, peeking into each room to see if anything was out of place. I made sure to close each door after checking it. And because of that, when I finished checking the last room and turned back around, my heart nearly stopped. The first door, right next to the staircase, was wide open. To me, that confirmed 100% that someone was in my house at that moment. I stood frozen for a few seconds and called out, asking if anyone was there. I was so scared that I couldn't move. That person could have been right inside that room, or already sneaking downstairs, and at that moment could have been anywhere. I remember taking slow, careful, and silent steps down the hallway, adrenaline surging through me, a heavy and sickening sense of dread settling in my stomach as I got closer to the doorway. And then I woke up. And no, this wasn't a dream. I woke up lying on the floor in the middle of the hallway, my head spinning and a splitting headache pounding through my skull. I think only about 10 minutes had passed since then, and it was clear that I had been attacked and knocked unconscious, with absolutely no memory beyond the moments right before that horrible thing happened. My vision faded in and out. I immediately called 911. The intruder who attacked me was long gone, but I tried to tell the police everything I could still remember. What haunts me the most is that a part of my memory is completely gone. Maybe I had faced him direct long enough to clearly describe him. Maybe I even knew exactly who he was, but it feels as if my own brain is hiding that from me. After that night, there were very few updates, and none of them led to anything concrete. I don't know who he was or what his true intentions were, but I wouldn't be surprised if he never intended for me to wake up at all. I worked at a local ski resort in a small mountain town as a security guard. My job mostly involved cleaning and watching over the property, and I had some basic security training because there had previously been a few nighttime break-ins, people stealing ski equipment or sneaking onto the slopes after the resort was closed. After several incidents like that, the company changed the schedule so that there were always 2 people working the night shift, both to handle routine tasks and to deter intruders. We didn't have any security cameras, so the security title didn't really affect my day-to-day work very much, especially since after switching to night shifts, no one had tried to break in for months. Occasionally, someone would come near the doors and look inside, but other than that, everything was always quiet. As I said, I never worked the night shift alone, at least not officially. My coworker, Matthew, was always scheduled with me, but he worked on the opposite side of the resort. The resort was divided into 2 large sections, connected only by a single hallway. There were times when I didn't see Matthew for days, sometimes even weeks at a time. So even though I technically wasn't working alone, most nights it felt like I was the only person there. That night started like any other. I clocked in and began cleaning the main lobby area. It was peak season, so the place was a mess. The work wasn't too difficult, but there was a lot of it. The first hour passed fairly quickly. I was still in the large room when I heard a sound that seemed like light tapping, almost as if someone were knocking on a window. I put my things down and walked toward the front, where most of the glass doors and windows were. I didn't see anything until I stood close to the window and noticed footprints directly below it. The footprints came right up to the glass and then curved around the side of the building. Not knowing what to think, I grabbed my jacket and stepped outside to investigate. I figured someone might be lost, and if not, I'd have to tell them to leave. But as soon as I went outside, I saw that the footprints continued from the window out toward the parking lot, which had already been completely cleared of snow. From there, I had no idea where they went. It was very strange, but it was too cold and too dark to walk all the way around the area. I went back inside. I continued working, hoping that whoever it was wouldn't come back. About 30 minutes passed. By then, the snow had surely covered the footprints outside, so I stopped thinking about it. That was when I heard several doors opening from the hallway, connecting the 2 sections. A few seconds later, Matthew appeared. He looked tense and confused when he saw me. He immediately asked me what I was doing. I looked at him, puzzled, and said that I was working. Matthew nodded, as if accepting the answer, but it also seemed like it didn't fully make sense to him. He asked if I was okay. Then he said that he must just be exhausted, shaking his head as he spoke. Before leaving, I mentioned that I had seen footprints in the snow and asked if it had been him. Matthew shook his head and said no. I hoped he would explain his strange anxiety, especially after I told him about the footprints, but he didn't say anything else. He He simply left my area and went back to the other side. Matthew and I weren't close friends. We rarely saw each other, so we were more acquaintances than anything else. He was also quite a bit older than me. Because of that, our conversations were mostly work-related. I mention this to explain why I didn't press him further or go to the other side to find out what was going on. I kept working, but for nearly an hour afterward, my mind couldn't stop thinking about how strange the night had been. And just as I thought the rest of the shift would pass normally, I heard a loud noise coming from the hallway connecting the two sections. It sounded like a door being slammed or something, hitting a wall. The noise startled me, and I immediately went to check if Matthew was okay. I reached the connecting hallway but saw nothing. I continued into the other section where Matthew was working, but he wasn't there. I called out his name repeatedly, but there was no response. I started to worry. When I reached the back of that section, my stomach dropped as I saw the back door standing wide open. Snow was blowing inside, but it looked like the door had only been open for a few minutes. I rushed over and looked outside. I didn't see anyone, but there were more footprints leading away from the building, heading up toward the ski slopes. Matthew had no reason to be out there, which made me even more frightened. I called his name again, but the wind swallowed my voice. I searched the entire inside of the resort for him, but he was nowhere to be found. The only clue was the footprints in the snow. I ran back to my area to grab my jacket, then hurried back to the back door. I stepped outside and began following the footprints. They went much farther than I had expected. Outside was completely silent, just wind and snow. The footprints led me to the base of a ski lift, then slightly up a low incline, and that was where I stopped. They led out of the resort entirely, straight into the forest surrounding the hillside. There were no lights out there, nothing at all. My heart started beating faster. I began to feel that these footprints might not belong to Matthew. I called his name again. Several long seconds passed in silence. Then, from deep behind the line of trees, I saw a figure step out and stare directly at me. From what I could see, that person looked nothing like Matthew. I turned and ran as fast as I could back down the slope toward the resort, falling several times as my boots caught in the deep snow. The person didn't chase me, but I knew they were watching me. I slammed the door shut and ran to the front desk, using the phone there to call the police. I didn't know what was happening, but I wasn't going to take any more chances. Because the resort was on a mountain, it took the police about half an hour to arrive. I hid in the rental storage room the entire time, listening to the wind outside and the terrifying silence inside the empty resort. About 10 minutes later, I heard a sound like a door opening on the other side of the resort, but I didn't dare go check. When the police arrived, they found another set of footprints returning to the back door. That meant the person had come back, possibly looking for me. About 30 minutes later, the police officially declared Matthew missing. They found no signs of a struggle inside, so they assumed that he may have known the person and either opened the door willingly or had been lured outside. Once the footprints led into the forest, there was no way to follow them further. For a time, I was even considered a suspect, since I was the last person to see him. But eventually, they confirmed that I wasn't involved. The entire situation was truly terrifying, and it's hard not to blame myself. But I also know that if I had gone deeper into the forest that night, there's a very real chance that I would have disappeared as well. This happened about a year ago, also around Christmas. I had driven a long distance to a small town in Montana, where my parents live, to surprise them for Christmas. I stayed there for a full week before heading back home. The drive is about 16 hours, but I've never thought it was that bad. I don't mind stopping at rest areas to nap for a few hours if needed, and I've always felt that was still better than stopping at a hotel or motel, because doing that would only make the trip longer. That day, I left in the afternoon, a few hours earlier than planned, because I had heard that a major snowstorm was on its way. I hoped that by leaving early, I could get through before the storm really hit. About 4 to 5 hours later, the storm began. The road, which had been mostly empty and normal, suddenly became covered in snow within minutes. The wind was very strong, pushing my car around and blasting snow directly into the windshield. I didn't feel like I was losing control, and since there were no other cars on the road, I still felt relatively safe. But after about an hour of this, I started to get tired, mainly from having to concentrate so intensely, and because the snow was beginning to pile up more on the road, my phone suddenly issued a winter storm warning. Just a few minutes later, I completely lost service. At that point, the situation was far worse than I felt comfortable with, especially since if anything happened, I wouldn't be able to call for help. I pulled into the nearest rest stop, a few miles away. It was a quiet rest area set back from the highway in the middle of the forest, with a small snow-covered parking lot and a service building. There was only one other car parked at the far end of the lot. It looked like it had been there since before the storm hit, because a thick layer of snow had already accumulated on its roof. A few minutes after I parked, the storm became even more intense. It turned into a complete whiteout. I couldn't even see the other car anymore. The wind was so strong that it genuinely frightened me. I couldn't imagine anyone driving in weather like that. An entire hour passed in boredom and cold. Eventually, because I was so uncomfortable, I decided to get out of the car and go into the service building to use the bathroom. The moment I stepped outside, the freezing wind and icy snow almost immediately caused physical pain. I hurried inside. The interior was just a small lobby, a few benches, some road maps, and 2 doors leading to the restrooms. Thankfully, the heating system was still working, so I stood in the lobby for a moment to warm up, watching the snow continue to fall through the window. I could barely make out the car still parked outside, completely covered in snow, including the windshield. I found it strange because the car didn't look like it was running. The temperature outside was below freezing if the heater wasn't on. Whoever was inside would have frozen long ago. After a minute, I walked up to the men's restroom door and pushed it, or at least I tried to. The door opened just a crack before immediately being pushed back and slammed shut. I pushed again, and this time it barely moved at all. I stepped back. The door wasn't locked. It was as if someone was standing on the other side, deliberately holding it shut. I stood there staring at the door for a moment, completely shocked and unsure what to think. It was extremely strange. I considered using the women's restroom, thinking that if the person in the men's room was the owner of the other car, it probably wouldn't matter much. But honestly, I no longer felt safe being in that building. I had a strong sense that something was very wrong. I didn't want to test my luck, so I hurried out of the building. As I stepped outside, I heard the restroom door swing open behind me, but I didn't turn around to look. I walked back through the storm to my car. By then, the entire parking lot was completely covered in snow. I wasn't even sure if I would be able to leave. I wanted to get out of there, even if it was just to drive a few miles to somewhere else, but I was afraid of getting stuck on the road. So I stayed in my car and waited for the storm to pass. I tried to come up with a reason why someone would block the door like that, but I genuinely couldn't think of anything that made sense. There was no explanation for how they would have known exactly when I entered the building, or how they could have been standing ready at the door to stop me. Just a few minutes later, I saw a shape begin to emerge from the white curtain of snow between my car and the building. It was a person. As soon as the figure became clear, he stopped and stood still in the middle of the storm. He looked like he was talking on the phone to someone, facing in my direction. I wasn't sure if he was actually looking at me or not. He paced back and forth in that spot for a while, still talking on the phone, then slowly began moving closer to my car. He took a few steps, then stopped, as if trying not to be too obvious. But at one point, when he was very close, I could clearly see that he was staring straight into my car, Then suddenly, he broke into a very wide, exaggerated smile and began walking directly toward my window. He came right up to the car and knocked on the window, grinning at me through the glass. I completely panicked, and as embarrassing as it is to admit, I froze in fear. For several seconds, I couldn't make myself do anything. The man started knocking harder, almost pounding on the glass so hard that I was surprised it didn't shatter. Then, farther back behind him, I saw another man step out of the service building and start running toward me. I snapped out of it and threw the car into reverse. My heart sank as the wheels spun uselessly and the car didn't move. The man got closer and closer, until suddenly my car jolted and found traction. I reversed, then shifted into drive. In the instant I sped away, the man who had just been running toward me threw a knife straight at my windshield. The knife bounced off, but it left a large crack right in the center of the glass. I drove wildly through the storm, praying that I wouldn't lose control or get stuck. I was sure they would chase me, but at least as far as I know, they didn't. I kept driving until the storm began to break and I got cell service back. But by then, too much time had passed, and the police couldn't find the two men when they arrived. The only thing they found was the car, still sitting in the middle of the parking lot, completely untouched. Contrary to what I had assumed, it wasn't the car belonging to the two men. It belonged to someone else. When the police showed me a photo, I didn't recognize the person. A few days later, it was confirmed that the man had gone missing. There were no traces of him at all. From what I was told, he had also been on a long road trip, and his family believed that he had pulled over to sleep for the night, and then no one ever heard from him again. Honestly, I believe that something truly horrible had happened at that rest stop just before I arrived. I believe one of the two men had been standing outside as a lookout, talking on the phone to the other one, letting him know exactly when I entered the building so he could block the door. If I had tried to force my way inside at that moment, I have a very bad feeling about what I would have seen, and maybe they wouldn't have let me leave at all.